The first thing I smelled was paint. Not breakfast. Not desert dust. Not the burnt coffee sitting in my travel mug while my work truck warmed up in the driveway. Paint. That sharp, chemical bite of fresh traffic enamel, the kind that crawls into your nose and stays there like a warning. It was 5:12 on a Tuesday morning in Willow Creek Commons, and the street was still dark enough for porch lights to matter. My boots scraped across the concrete as I stepped outside, keys in one hand, coffee in the other, ready for another 12-hour day striping a grocery store parking lot on the west side of Phoenix. Then I saw it. My curb was red. Not a little red. Not a faded city marking from years ago. Fresh, glossy, fire lane red from my mailbox all the way past the nose of my driveway, still wet enough to shine under the street lamp. The paint looked like someone had dragged a warning sign across the front of my house and left it bleeding there. My white work truck sat in the driveway like a hostage. Under the windshield wiper was a folded HOA violation notice, already damp from morning dew. I didn't touch it right away. I just stood there, listening to the low tick of my truck engine, the faint hiss of sprinklers 2 houses down, and the slow, satisfied click of heels on pavement. Vivian Ashford was already across the street. Of course she was. HOA president. Luxury realtor. Professional smile. White tennis visor at dawn like she was about to play doubles with Satan. She had her phone up, recording before I'd said a single word. "Good morning, Ethan," she called, sweet as cough syrup and twice as fake. "Just documenting compliance." I looked back at the curb. The red paint ran straight across the street edge in front of my property, with sloppy overspray misted onto the corner of my driveway. That was the first thing that made my stomach go still. Not angry. Still. Because I paint lines for a living. And whoever did this had done it fast, cheap, and scared. Vivian walked closer, her perfume fighting a losing war against the solvent stink rising off the curb. "That area has been designated a city-mandated fire lane. Your commercial vehicle is creating an emergency access hazard." "My truck is in my driveway," I said. "For now." Her smile sharpened. "The board has authorized $250 per day in fines for violations. Towing begins at noon if necessary." The folded notice under my wiper suddenly looked less like paper and more like bait. I crouched beside the curb without answering her. The paint was still tacky. No cones. No warning tape. No city stencil. No posted work order. Just a red stripe slapped onto a public street in the dark, close enough to my driveway that a drunk toddler could have done cleaner edges. Vivian kept filming. "You really should have attended the last board meeting," she said. "These improvements are for the safety of the entire community." I touched the overspray on my driveway with a gloved finger. It smeared. That was when I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because bullies always think loud colors make strong laws. They think a clipboard turns opinion into authority. They think if they move fast enough, ordinary people will panic, pay, and apologize. But I wasn't ordinary when it came to paint. My father taught me pavement marking before I learned long division. He used to say a painted line is only as legal as the paper behind it. Vivian didn't know that. She thought she had painted me into a corner. What she really did was leave a trail. "My name is Ethan Cole, and I've been painting lines since I was 13 years old. Not art. Not murals. Lines. Parking stalls behind grocery stores. Loading zones behind warehouses. Handicap symbols outside pharmacies. Yellow school curbs that had to be measured twice because a bus driver's mirror could turn 3 bad inches into a lawsuit." My father started coal line and stripe out of a rusted blue trailer and a borrowed compressor, and by the time I was old enough to drive, I could tell the difference between legal traffic red and cheap hardware store enamel by smell alone. That morning, standing in my driveway with Vivian's phone pointed at my face, that smell told me plenty. I bought my house in Willow Creek Commons because it had a deep driveway, a 2-car garage, and enough room to keep my equipment out of sight. After my divorce, I needed something simple. A clean place. A quiet street. Somewhere my daughter Lily could spend weekends without hearing me apologize for starting over. My work truck was not decoration. It was my paycheck on wheels. White Ford F-250, ladder rack, cone stack, stencil box, paint tips, chalk line, respirator, and the old measuring wheel my dad gave me when my hands were still too small to pull a striping trigger steady. That wheel had a cracked rubber tire and a counter that stuck when it got cold, but I kept it behind the driver's seat like some men keep a Bible. Dad used to roll it across empty asphalt at sunrise, cigarette tucked behind one ear, saying, "A line only matters if the paperwork says it matters." I didn't understand that as a kid. Back then, paint felt like power. You sprayed a stripe, and cars obeyed it. People parked between it. Trucks stopped before it. A whole lot could change because one man pulled one trigger. But my father knew better. Paint was the last step. The paper came first. Permits. Plans. Measurements. Sign-offs. Jurisdiction. Without that, a painted line was just colored nerve. That was why I never caused trouble in Willow Creek. I paid my dues. I kept my yard trimmed. I stored my cones inside. I even backed my truck in so the company lettering didn't face the street like a billboard. Vivian still hated it. She looked at my truck and saw labor. I looked at it and saw rent, child support, and 12-hour days under a sun hot enough to soften asphalt. So when she called that curb a fire lane, I didn't hear authority. I heard bad paint trying to sound legal. Vivian Ashford had been HOA president for 3 years, which in Willow Creek Commons was apparently long enough to start confusing elected volunteer with royalty. She lived 4 houses down in a cream-colored stucco place with black shutters, desert landscaping, and a fountain that ran even during water restrictions. Every morning, her white Lexus rolled through the neighborhood slow enough to judge every mailbox, every trash bin, every blade of grass that leaned the wrong direction. She wore pearl earrings to board meetings and had nails so polished they looked professionally installed. Vivian sold high-end homes for a living, and she treated the whole subdivision like one giant listing photo. Quiet luxury. Clean lines. Community pride. That was what she called it. What she meant was no work trucks, no visible tools, no signs that anyone on her street made money with their hands. The first notice came 2 months after I moved in. Commercial branding visible from roadway. That meant the small coal line and stripe lettering on my truck door. I sent back the bylaw section allowing personal vehicles under 10,000 pounds, plus my registration showing it was not a commercial box truck. The second notice was for construction odors. That one made me laugh so hard I almost spilled coffee on the citation. I wasn't even painting at home. The smell she complained about was sealed traffic paint inside unopened 5-gallon buckets in my garage. The third was for safety cones visible from residential space. I sent photos proving they were stacked behind a closed garage door. Her response came in that tight, sugary tone she used when she was losing. "We're simply trying to maintain standards, Mr. Cole." People like Vivian loved the word standards. It sounded cleaner than control. The thing she hated most was being corrected where neighbors could hear it. At one meeting, I calmly read the actual parking bylaw out loud after she tried to invent a work vehicle ban on the spot. Her smile froze. Her knuckles went white around the gavel. The room went quiet enough to hear the fluorescent lights buzz. After that, she stopped pretending this was about rules. There were 3 houses for sale on our street that month. Vivian had signs in 2 of the yards. I saw her photographer one afternoon angling a camera away from my driveway like my truck was a dead animal in the background. So she found a cleaner way to erase it. She didn't ban my truck. She painted the street around it red and called the color law. By 7:30, the HOA app had already turned my curb into a crime scene. I was sitting at my kitchen table with Vivian's violation notice spread beside my coffee, the paper still curled from windshield moisture, when my phone started buzzing like a wasp trapped in a jar. Community Safety Update. That was the title of Vivian's post. Below it was a photo of my truck, cropped tight so nobody could see it was parked in my own driveway. Just the front bumper, the red curb, and enough shadow to make it look like I had abandoned a piece of industrial equipment in a hospital emergency lane. Unauthorized commercial vehicle obstructing newly designated fire access zone, she wrote. The board will begin enforcement immediately to protect residents, children, and emergency responders. Children. Emergency responders. Safety. She stacked those words like sandbags around a lie. By 8 o'clock, the comments were already filling up. A few neighbors asked if the city had approved the change. Vivian ignored them. Someone else wrote, "Rules are rules." Another posted a fire truck emoji, because apparently that counted as civic engagement now. Then the formal email arrived. $250 per day. Immediate compliance required. Towing authorized after noon if the obstruction remained. The subject line read, "Final notice, fire lane violation." I read it twice, standing by the sink, watching sunlight catch the red paint outside. It looked even worse in daylight. Uneven edges. Thin coverage. A crooked start line near the mailbox where the painter had hesitated. There was no city stencil, no fire lane lettering, no posted order, nothing except Vivian's confidence. At 9, Mrs. Alvarez from across the street walked over in house slippers, holding her robe closed against the dry morning wind. She was a retired ER nurse with silver hair and a stare that could make grown men sit up straighter. "That curb has never been for fire access," she said quietly. "Ambulances always stop at the corner. Fire trucks use the main entrance. Everybody knows that." I nodded, but I didn't ask her to get involved. Not yet. Fear moves through HOA neighborhoods faster than gossip. The mail carrier came next, slowing her little truck in front of my house, frowning at the red paint like it had personally insulted her route. She rolled down the window. "They painted your delivery approach," she said. "That's going to be a problem." Before I could answer, Vivian appeared again, crossing the street with that phone in her hand. She had changed into a cream blazer now, realtor armor. Her perfume hit before her voice did. "Ethan, I hope you're making arrangements. The tow company has been notified. My truck is on my property. Your vehicle affects emergency access. Show me the city order." Her smile tightened. Maybe this neighborhood just isn't built for people who bring work home. That landed exactly where she meant it to. A delivery guy unloading tile 3 houses down looked away. Mrs. Alvarez's mouth flattened. The mail carrier suddenly became very interested in her scanner. I could feel heat rising in my neck, but I kept my voice flat. "What tow company?" Vivian blinked. That was enough. 10 minutes later, I was on the phone with Desert Sun Towing. The dispatcher sounded bored until I gave her my address. "Oh, yeah," she said. "We have a pre-authorization from Willow Creek Commons. Fire lane enforcement. Pickup requested if vehicle remains after noon." There it was. Vivian wasn't trying to enforce a rule. She was trying to create a scene before anyone could check whether the rule existed. I hung up, walked to my truck, and pulled out my father's old measuring wheel. The rubber tire squeaked once against the driveway. That was the moment I stopped defending myself and started measuring. The HOA meeting room sat behind the clubhouse pool, a beige little box that smelled like lemon disinfectant, stale popcorn, and old arguments. By 6 that evening, every metal chair was filled. Vivian had made sure of that. She stood at the front beside a folding table, wearing her cream blazer and a smile sharp enough to open envelopes. Behind her, taped to the wall, was a printed neighborhood map with red marker lines drawn across half the curbs in Willow Creek Commons. My street was circled twice. "Fire access compliance," she announced, tapping the map with one pearl-colored fingernail. This was a necessary safety improvement recommended by the city. There it was again. Recommended by the city. Not ordered. Not permitted. Not inspected. Just soft enough to avoid proof and official enough to scare people. I raised my hand. Vivian's smile flickered. "Yes, Mr. Cole? What's the permit number?" The room shifted. A cough from the back. Someone's chair leg scraped the tile. Vivian looked down at her papers like the answer might crawl out and rescue her. "Those details are handled administratively." "Then who issued the work order?" "Our legal counsel can address procedure." The HOA attorney sat 2 chairs over, a young guy in an expensive suit who looked like he had billed someone just for breathing. He folded his hands and gave me the kind of smile people use when they're about to say nothing with confidence. "The board is authorized to take reasonable safety actions in common and community-adjacent areas," he said. That wasn't my question. Vivian's jaw tightened. I could feel eyes on me. Neighbors who had liked my Christmas lights suddenly studied their shoes. That was how Vivian survived. She made questioning her feel more expensive than obeying her. I kept my voice level. "You painted a public curb red, threatened daily fines, and authorized towing. I'm asking for the city permit number." The attorney cleared his throat. Permit documentation, if applicable, is not required to be debated in open session. If applicable. That phrase landed in my head like a dropped wrench. Vivian moved fast after that. She called for a vote to affirm enforcement. 3 board members nodded before she finished reading the motion. The gavel came down with a cheap wooden crack that echoed off the walls. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA management company. Photos. Measurements. Copy of the violation. Request for permit records. Their response arrived 4 hours later. The board acted within its safety authority. No permit attached. No work order. No city contact. Just a paragraph of polished fog. So I called the city. Public Works transferred me to traffic. Traffic sent me to fire prevention. Fire prevention sent me back to Public Works. By the 5th call, the hold music sounded like punishment. But every HOA document repeated the same magic phrase. City-mandated safety improvement. Paperwork has a smell. Fake paperwork smells like fresh ink and panic. The next morning, I drove to City Hall with Vivian's letter in a folder and the smell of red paint still stuck in my nose. City Hall was one of those low concrete buildings that always felt 10 degrees colder than outside. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The floor smelled like mop water and old paper. Behind the permit counter, a clerk with silver glasses took my photos, the HOA notice, and the printed phrase Vivian had leaned on like a crutch. City-mandated safety improvement. The clerk typed it in. Nothing. She tried my street name. Nothing. She tried Willow Creek Commons. Still nothing. Her eyebrows pulled together. "Do you have a permit number?" That's what I asked them. She looked back at the screen, then at the red curb photo, then at me. The printer behind her coughed once and went silent. "There is no city mandate for this location." I didn't smile. Not yet. I just felt something in my chest settle into place, like a latch closing. She called over a traffic engineer named Daniel Price, a tall guy with sunburned forearms and the tired eyes of someone who had spent half his career explaining obvious things to people in expensive shoes. He spread my photos across the counter and studied them without saying a word. Then he tapped the curb picture with one finger. Wrong shade. I blinked. You can tell from the photo? I can tell from the shine. City red dries flatter. This is private traffic enamel, probably sprayed too heavy. He pointed again. No approved stencil. No fire lane lettering. No posted work order. No cone pattern. No traffic control plan. And this line crosses a driveway transition. The words hit clean and hard. Every phrase Vivian had wrapped in safety suddenly started peeling. Daniel pulled up the city map and turned the screen toward me. That curb is public right-of-way. Your HOA can't alter it without an approved permit and inspection. There it was. Not community adjacent. Not board authorized. Public. Vivian had painted over something she did not control, then fined me for violating the color she put there. Daniel asked if I had measurements. I walked outside to my truck, pulled my father's old measuring wheel from behind the seat, and brought it back in like evidence from a crime scene. We drove out together an hour later. The desert sun was already cooking the asphalt. Heat shimmered above the street. My measuring wheel clicked along the curb while Daniel watched, clipboard in hand. Click. 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 Each little sound felt like a nail going into Vivian's story. The red zone ran 14 feet past any reasonable emergency access boundary. Worse, it bent too close to the driveway apron and boxed in normal curb use without a single approved marking. Daniel took photos of the overspray on my concrete, the uneven edge near the mailbox, and the missing city stencil. Then he made one more call. I heard only his side of it. Ashford Surface Solutions, registration status? Expired? Since when? My head turned slowly. Ashford. Vivian Ashford. Daniel hung up and looked at me with the kind of expression inspectors get when a small violation suddenly grows teeth. The contractor listed on the HOA invoice has an expired city vendor registration, he said. And they were never authorized to do work in the right-of-way. I stared at that red curb glowing under the Arizona sun. Vivian had painted one curb to trap my truck. The permit file showed she had painted the whole neighborhood into fraud. I did not touch the curb. That mattered. Vivian wanted me angry. She wanted me outside with a roller, covering red paint with black paint while her phone recorded every second. Then the story would be simple. Unstable contractor vandalizes fire lane. HOA forced to protect community. I had been around enough job sites to know the first man holding the brush usually gets blamed for the mess. So I left the red paint exactly where it was. I photographed it instead. Every morning before work, I walked the curb with my phone, my measuring wheel, and a clipboard. The desert air smelled like hot dust and traffic enamel. My boots clicked over loose gravel at the driveway edge while the wheel ticked along the curb like a metronome counting down Vivian's bad decisions. Click. 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 I measured the red stripe from mailbox to driveway. I measured the overspray on my concrete. I measured how far the paint stretched beyond the nearest hydrant approach. Then I drove through Willow Creek Commons and found 3 more curbs painted the same sloppy red. Same heavy shine. Same uneven edges. Same lack of city stencil. This was not one mistake. This was a project. Mrs. Alvarez signed a short statement saying emergency vehicles had never used my curb as access. The mail carrier wrote that the new marking interfered with normal delivery approach. 2 neighbors forwarded me their assessment notices. That was the 5th bomb. $600 per household for fire access compliance. 63 homes billed. $38,000 collected. For a few crooked red lines sprayed at night by a contractor the city had not authorized. I stared at those notices in my garage under the hum of fluorescent lights, surrounded by cones, stencils, and paint tips. The paper felt too smooth in my hands. Too polished. Vivian had wrapped the whole thing in safety language, but money leaves fingerprints, paint never can. I made 4 packets. 1 went to Daniel Price at City Traffic Engineering. 1 went to the fire marshal. 1 went to the HOA management company. The last went to the HOA insurance carrier, because unpermitted fire lane markings are not just embarrassing. They create liability, and insurance people can smell liability through a locked filing cabinet. Photos. Measurements. City email confirming no mandate. Vendor status. Assessment letters. The HOA violation notice. The tow authorization. No insults. No threats. Just paper. By Thursday afternoon, Vivian sent one final email. Tow enforcement will proceed Friday morning if the obstruction remains. I read it twice, then looked out at my truck sitting legally in my driveway, clean white paint glowing under the garage light. My father's measuring wheel leaned against the workbench, its cracked rubber tire dusty from the street. I didn't paint over her lie. I outlined it. Friday morning arrived with the kind of silence that makes every small sound feel guilty. At 7:46, I was in the garage, standing beside my truck with the door open and the smell of cold metal, rubber mats, and old coffee hanging in the air. The Ford was parked fully inside my driveway. Not one tire touched the street. Not one bumper crossed that crooked red line Vivian loved so much. I had measured it 3 times. At 7:58, the tow truck turned onto my street. Its diesel engine growled low and ugly between the stucco houses, echoing off garage doors like a warning. Yellow lights flashed across Vivian's red curb. The driver slowed in front of my house, looked at my truck, looked at the curb, then looked confused. Vivian appeared before he even climbed down. Cream blazer. Pearl earrings. Phone in hand. She moved like a woman arriving at her own ribbon-cutting ceremony. "Right there," she said, pointing at my truck. "Fire lane obstruction. HOA authorized removal." The driver scratched his beard. "Ma'am, that truck's in the driveway. It affects emergency access." He looked at the driveway, then at the street, then at me. I just stood there with my hands in my jacket pockets, feeling the folded copies of my packet against my fingers. Vivian turned her phone toward me. "Mr. Cole has refused multiple lawful notices. This is what happens when people think community safety rules don't apply to them." I could hear curtains moving across the street. Garage doors humming open. Mrs. Alvarez stood on her porch in a blue robe, arms crossed. The mail carrier had stopped at the corner, watching through her windshield. The tow driver lowered the hook halfway. That was when the city truck rolled in. White pickup. Amber light bar. City seal on the door. A second vehicle followed behind it, this one from the fire marshal's office. No sirens. No drama. Just 2 engines idling in the morning air while Vivian's smile began to lose blood. Daniel Price stepped out first with a clipboard tucked under one arm. The fire marshal followed, a square-shouldered woman with mirrored sunglasses and the calm expression of someone who had seen expensive stupidity before breakfast. Vivian lowered her phone. "Can I help you?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer her right away. He walked straight to the curb, crouched, and placed a bright orange violation tag on the red paint. Then another near the mailbox. Then another on the HOA entrance sign where the same fake red markings continued around the corner. The color was almost beautiful. Red paint looked loud. Orange paper spoke louder. The tow driver raised the hook back up without being asked. Daniel turned to Vivian. "This marking is not enforceable. There is no approved permit, no traffic control plan, no city work order, and no fire lane conversion for this location." Vivian's mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. The fire marshal held up one of the HOA letters. Your board represented this as a city-mandated safety improvement. It was recommended, Vivian said quickly. For emergency access. By whom? Vivian looked at the tow driver, then at the neighbors, then at me, like one of us might volunteer to save her. Nobody did. I handed Daniel the certified packet. Same one I had mailed. Photos. Measurements. City email. Vendor status. Assessment notices. The tow authorization. All of it clean and flat in a manila folder. The fire marshal flipped to the invoice. Ashford Surface Solutions, she read. Any relation? Vivian's face tightened. That was answer enough. Daniel pointed to the red curb stretching past my driveway. Unauthorized work in public right-of-way. Improper marking. No approved stencil. No posted work order. Enforcement stops now. From somewhere behind me, a neighbor muttered, "We paid $600 for this?" That sentence moved through the street faster than fire. Phones came out. Not Vivian's this time. Everyone's. The HOA app that had turned my truck into a warning sign was suddenly filling with photos of orange tags, city vehicles, and Vivian standing beside a tow truck that no longer wanted anything to do with her. I looked at the red paint shining under the Arizona sun. For 3 days, Vivian had used that color to scare people. By 8:30 Friday morning, the whole neighborhood knew it was just paint. The city gave Willow Creek Commons 10 business days to stop enforcement, remove every illegal marking, and submit every invoice tied to the fire access project. 10 days. Vivian had given me 5 hours before towing my truck. Funny how time feels different when the clipboard changes hands. The fines against me disappeared first. Not reduced. Not reviewed. Erased. The management company sent the email at 4:18 that afternoon, and I remember the exact sound my phone made on the workbench. One soft buzz under the hum of fluorescent lights. I opened it with paint still under my fingernails and read the sentence twice. All fire lane violations issued to your account have been voided. No apology, of course. People like Vivian never apologize when silence costs less. Then came the refund notice. Every homeowner who had paid the $600 fire access compliance fee got a letter from the HOA management company. The money would be returned pending audit. $38,000 that Vivian had wrapped in safety language suddenly looked exactly like what it was, a private collection for unpermitted paint sprayed across public right-of-way by a contractor the city never authorized. Ashford Surface Solutions lost its vendor eligibility the same week. I heard that from Daniel Price, who called me while I was loading cones for a warehouse job. His voice was calm, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath it. Expired registration. Unauthorized right-of-way work. No traffic control plan. No inspection request. A beautiful little checklist of things my father would have called, how not to run a job. Vivian resigned the following Monday. She did it in a 3-paragraph email full of words like family priorities, community healing, and unfair personal attacks. Not once did she mention the red curb. Not once did she mention the invoice with her brother-in-law's company name on it. But by then, everyone in Willow Creek had seen the photos. Orange tags on red paint. City trucks in the street. The tow driver backing away like Vivian had handed him a snake. A week later, the city crew came to remove the markings. The sandblaster screamed against the curb, harsh and metallic, throwing red dust into the morning light. I stood in my driveway with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand and watched the fake fire lane vanish inch by inch. The smell was bitter. Burnt paint and concrete powder. It smelled like a lie being ground down to the surface underneath. Mrs. Alvarez stood across the street and gave me one small nod. That meant more than applause. My truck stayed where it had always been. In my driveway. Legal. Paid for. Ready for work. Vivian had painted my curb red because she thought color could become law. But law was never in the paint. It was in the permit she didn't have. Justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a measuring wheel, a permit clerk, and one bright orange tag on a lie.